So let's go to our second speaker. Can we have Uri on the screen?
Hi everyone.
Hi, Uri.
Great
Nice
to.
to
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was very quick, and really glad that you made it instead of Jamie. So as I understand, you will basically give his talk about GraphQL Yoga.
Yeah. So yeah, Jamie felt sick, so I replaced him. He would do that talk way better than me, but I'll try my best to yeah to to make it well. And I can answer questions later and everything else.
Yeah, sure. So the stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. Let me know if you can see my screen. Can you see my screen in the slides? I hope so. Wait, let me check if you can actually see my screen. Yes, it is. Okay, I'm starting. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about GraphQL Yoga 2.0. It's basically it's a completely new server framework to write GraphQL servers. It's basically a completely rewrite of GraphQL Yoga 1.0. I'm going to discuss it. I'm going to share why we created it, like why we took over it and then rebuild it, and from those reasons why we think it's a good. Basically, currently we think at the Guild that this is the best server out there, and we also believe it will stay the best server for many years to come. So first of all, a bit about the Guild. We are the largest open source group in GraphQL currently in the ecosystem. And wait, let me see if I can share my notes here. Just a second. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're the largest open source group in the ecosystem, and we maintain a lot of different libraries. Like some of them you know probably, like GraphQL Inspector and GraphQL Code Generator, and many different libraries. And GraphQL Code Generator. I'm not going to go through all the libraries. You can ask me later about each one of them, but most of them you're probably, if you are in the GraphQL ecosystem, you used before, like GraphQL Code Generator, GraphQL Tools and Schema Stitching, GraphQL Mesh that lets you basically take any source, even if it's not GraphQL, and automatically convert that into GraphQL. I heard that the former talk was about webhooks. So also in Mesh, we have a lot of interesting stuff there, like, for example, automatically converting webhooks into GraphQL subscriptions, all kinds of things like that. I just joined late, so I'm sorry that I haven't heard the previous talks. I hope it was recorded and I'll watch it later. GraphQL Inspector that basically runs in your CI and validates that you didn't make any breaking changes in your GraphQL API, and many other libraries. And the idea and the philosophy of the Guild is that we build a lot of different libraries. They're all individual, so and separated and modularized, so you don't need to buy into our ecosystem. You can use one and you can gradually introduce more and more. But if you use all of them together, you basically get like a full platform that works well together. But we're not trying to lock you into our product or whatever. So that's kind of like our philosophy. And also each library is maintained under the individual developers, and not under the Guild. For example, GraphQL Inspector and GraphQL Config are under Camille's names, and GraphQL Tools are under Arda's names. So it's like all under individual developers. And it's also because, first of all, to give them, they're the actual people that maintain it and not the company. And also, if something happens to the company, the open source will continue. So there's a lot of different reasons, and the main reasons are, how do we make sure that when you use libraries from the Guild, open source libraries, you know that like 3 years from today, they will still be there. So that's our unique structure. So while we were like built, that unique structure basically makes us also never try to create something that is already there. We always try to contribute to something that is already there. And that's what we tried for many years. We tried to, to contribute to Apollo server and to the existing servers out there, but we had issues with how it was built and how it was maintained, and also many other alternatives. So we went back to the drawing board and we were like, what do we actually want from a GraphQL server and what is missing for us? Because going into the decision of building a new GraphQL server framework is not an easy decision. It's not something we wanted necessarily to do. But so what do we want from a server? So what you see here is like the basic function of GraphQL. Like GraphQL basically gives us, let's say, 3 important functions: validation, parsing, and execute. And these things, luckily, at least in the JavaScript world, are being taken care of for us by GraphQL JS. And we still believe in GraphQL JS, so the core reference implementation. So our question was, what do we want from a server other than or on top of GraphQL JS? So the things that we want from a server, or at least what we thought at the time, and I would love to hear later also from the participants, it was around schema creation. How do we create the schema? And there's many ways of doing that. Some people prefer code-first approach. Some people prefer schema-first approach. There's many different libraries for each of those, like Nexus or Photos and all kinds of libraries for that. So people want to choose their own way. They don't want us to tell them or dictate what is the best solution. The server also needs to handle communication, right? Like whether it's HTTP or WebSocket or whatever protocol you want, and no matter, and we want the server to be able to be deployed in all kinds of places, like lambdas and just regular containers and serverless environments and all kinds, and Cloudflare workers and all kinds of things like that. Also, when we talk about server, we need to take care of things like caching and performance, tracing, logging, security and auth, error handling, all kinds of things that you would find a lot of, fun and interesting conference talks about. But we kept repeating this and building it again and again and again to all of our clients, and it felt like it could be easier. It could be reusable. And also from the server, we want an ecosystem, a thriving ecosystem. We want like something that we want something that basically there's a whole ecosystem around it that's like we can rely on. Like it's not based on one company. It's not based on like anything like that. Yeah. So what is the current state of GraphQL server out there? Servers out there, mostly in the node world, I'm talking about here. And that's this is an opinion, right? Like we can debate if that's true or not, and I would love to debate everyone here. But we think that the current state of the most popular servers out there is that the frameworks are very opinionated, and many of them are poorly maintained. And for regular users that are onboarding on GraphQL, or they want to build a broad product on GraphQL, they're not necessarily aware of all these things. Like it's hard for them to determine, like if a library is very popular, it's very hard for them to understand that it's actually not well maintained. Another thing is like those servers, they take opinions, right? So if you use SDL, like schema first, or if you use code first, suddenly, for whatever reason, you can share all kinds of solutions, like around caching and logging and things like that. Why? Like, why not? Why won't we be able to share all the same solutions across all of the ecosystem? Also, those libraries are wrapping basically the entire request pipeline. So sometimes you need to install different versions of those frameworks or extra libraries when you now want to use your your GraphQL server over another protocol in a different environment like Cloudflare Workers or Dino, suddenly it's very hard or impossible. And we also don't understand why, right? Because at the end of the day, GraphQL is just that GraphQL JS execution. Everything else should be choosable, pluggable. And also, these frameworks, many times they don't let you really change things or hook into things. And for us, when we have a lot of clients and our use cases are becoming more complex and very high scale, we need to be able to do a bit more than the things that they let us to do. And there's all kinds of reasons that's how they're built, because many of these frameworks are built by companies that basically want to gradually lock you into their solutions. They want that you would use their solutions, and it will be very hard for you to use another solution later. And that's the exact opposite of the philosophy that I mentioned before for the guild. And we don't want to basically put our clients into this vendor locking machine. Like, we want to give our clients the best solution without locking them into something that later on they would regret. So what you're going to see here is basically a drawing board of how Dotan from the guild, basically, we had the discussion, we had the meeting, and we started thinking and brainstorming about it. So we wrote this. This is kind of like the GraphQL, the basic GraphQL functions: parse, validate, execute, and subscribe for subscriptions. And we thought, well, what if we could hook into before and after each of these phases? So we could completely control the workflow, and we could completely customize it, and we'll have tons of power before and after each of these phases. But then we would be able to write this code as plugins. So as a user, you could use these plugins. The people that write the plugins has enormous power, but the users, the people that actually use the GraphQL server, for them it's easy. It doesn't change anything of how they work or what they do and things like that. And the API that is exposed later is the same API, so it's basically transparent. So what I'm showing here is Envelop. Envelop is the plugin system that we announced about a year ago, and it's now extremely popular. So, by the way, here you can also hook any schema builder you want, like Nexus, GraphQL tools with CodeGen, Photos, anything you want. And then the other part of it is that all the parts of the HTTP handling and the communication handling and the request pipeline is outside of this. So all the plugins you can use, and you can reshare them, but it doesn't matter where you deploy the server. It doesn't matter what HTTP framework you use. And also the usage of the HTTP server and framework is exactly like it was intended. We're not like wrapping that, because they know best how to do it. So that's Envelop. Envelop, if you don't know already, we released like about a year ago. It became very popular. And some of these benefits of Envelop I'm going to talk a bit about, because all of this at the end of the day translates into Yoga, and I'll show it in a second. First of all, the benefits of Envelop was they didn't make a lot of hard things that used to considered hard or advanced capabilities in GraphQL very easy, because this is the API of Envelop as the user. Like, you just get like an Envelop object that later you send to your server, and you just with 4 lines of code, you created an extremely performant server. Like, use schema is just how you pass that schema, and it doesn't matter how you created it, so you get the flexibility. Use parser cache, use validation cache, and use GraphQL JIT is basically many different forms of automatically caching all kinds of parts of your GraphQL execution, and process. So just by doing these 4 lines of code, you got extremely performant server. So for the user, it's extremely easy. For the developer, it's extremely easy. But for the person that writes these plugins, you get extreme power. You can, hook in before, on parse, on execute. Like, you have a lot of power to do that. So that's why it slowly grew, and then we basically created a plugin hub. It's like a whole marketplace for tools and plugins that you can install for free. It's open source, and you could share it across all your different users in your company. Like there's like plugins for response caching, tracing with Prometheus, Datadog, New Relic, Sentry, OpenTelemetry, Apollo tracing, everything you can think of. Loggers, persistent queries, and also all kinds of things around security, like rate limiting, depth limiting, Auth0 integration, many different things. Like you should really check it out there, I think. So that was the first part of what Envelop has done. But then, again, all of these plugins could be shared across the whole ecosystem, because it doesn't matter if your server is using Express, Festify, you deploy it into your server as like Next.js functions, Next.js routes, AWS Lambdas, Cloudflare workers. You can still use the same code, you can still use the same plugins. So that was the core idea behind it. And the second thing, and this envelope, it's a very core feature. So it basically became kind of like the underlying framework of frameworks. So what do I mean by that? So for example, like frameworks like Redwood.js, I don't know if people know here, they just announced, I think a week ago, the 1.0 version. They basically completely changed, it's a full stack framework for React and GraphQL. They completely migrated from using Apollo server under the hood to use Envelop as the first phase. Later on, pretty recently, they also migrated to Yoga, but I'll get to that in a second. So we basically, with Envelop, it's like a building block for others to build their own preferences. For example, Klarna, they're using GraphQL. And for them, when they moved into Envelop, the infrastructure team could basically build this kind of shared infrastructure across all the different teams that created GraphQL, that built GraphQL across Klarna. So they could share the same login system, they could share the same configurations very, very easily, while giving their teams the flexibility to choose whatever they want. So that was really successful, and there's many other companies that did that. But then we thought, well, we built the building block, but still, and then we tried to PR, by the way, the most popular libraries out there, but because they were so poorly maintained, so they could use and rely on Envelop, but because they were so poorly maintained and slow, nothing happened. So we waited, and then we said, you know what? Why won't we also create our own batteries included server? Because we really think that there's a possibility here to create an easy to use server that is, maybe out of the box, it's, opinionated, but you can still completely customize it. So you get all the benefits. You get all the benefits that you want. So that's when we thought to create a new one, but then we saw GraphQL Yoga. GraphQL Yoga was a framework that was being developed by Prisma many years ago with the same goals. And they actually did a really good job at the beginning. It was one of the most popular GraphQL frameworks out there. But then they kind of shifted their own focus into other areas, other parts of app development, and Yoga development was basically halted. So then many years later, we contacted them, and they were very generous to basically move GraphQL Yoga to us. And ever since a couple of months ago, we basically rebuilt Yoga based on Envelop and based on all the new ideas that we know today from the GraphQL ecosystem. And it's basically our dream framework, the one framework that we always wanted. So out of the box, you get subscription support, official and updated graphical in your local host. It follows all the new specs, like the GraphQL spec, the GraphQL over HTTP spec, the GraphQL over multipart. spec, and also the W3C fetch API. So it's spec compliant and extremely modern. And but for you as a developer, it's extremely easy. Let's see some code. So you can see here, this is like the most basic example of Yoga if you use in a regular node server, right? Like because it's based on the W3C standard, this is all you need to do. Like it uses underneath the regular fetch API. You just need to pass yours in your schema, which you can create in any form you want, and that's it. But it's also completely customizable. So, if you want here, for example, this is the same server, the same hello world, but with photos, which is a really good code first approach to create your schema that we highly recommend, by the way. If you're going code first, we think this is one of the best libraries. But also if you use Nexus, then here is a server with GraphQL Yoga and Nexus. If you use GQTX, same thing here. We support all different ways for you to create your schema and resolvers with Yoga, and it's still extremely easy. But also, because we follow the spec, then out of the box we support things like file uploads, right? You don't need to configure anything. You don't need to install a new library because we basically just support the standard of doing that. So you don't need to do anything, and it's extremely easy. But also, like I said, it's all completely customizable. What you see here is the same Envelop plugins that I talked before. So this is, again, like a very simple server, but with 3 lines of code, you basically created the depth limit and you protected your server. You created the response cache to cache your queries automatically, and you get full error tracing with Sentry. So again, like, it's extremely easy, but also extremely customizable. And then, also we made it very, very easy to, first of all, handle errors in GraphQL. There's big debates on how to do it, and great conference talks and everything. Now, GraphQL Yoga out of the box masks, first of all, the regular errors, so they won't click into your users. But also, it's like very easy to wrap errors that you do want to expose to your users with the Yoga error, and then you will show the errors as you should. So we made error handling much easier and safer. And and like I said, everything is customizable. So what you can see here, for example, is if you still want to use Express server, no problem. Like you can see here, this is just regular usage of Express with GraphQL Yoga. So it's very easy, and it just looks like any other Express applications that you can find. And the same thing goes for Festify and things like that. But but it also means that because we follow the specs, it's extremely easy to then use Yoga in other environments that are not regular node environment. What you see here is using GraphQL Yoga as Next.js routes, for example. Another place, what you see here is actually Cloudflare workers. Cloudflare workers follow the W3C spec, so it's actually the easiest way to use GraphQL Yoga is to actually use it with Cloudflare workers. That's all you need to do, and you get like GraphQL on edge. And what you see here is GraphQL Yoga using Dino in Dinoland. So you don't need now a different framework to use GraphQL with Dino. And it's all because it's a modern framework that follows the spec, and we continuously test and we continuously improve it. And like any library from the guild, will continue to do it for years. Another cool thing and last thing that I wanted to mention is that all those things makes GraphQL Yoga and Envelop basically be the Babel for GraphQL. So everyone here that uses JavaScript, that we always want to use like the latest features of JavaScript, even if the browsers don't support that. Thanks to the Envelop plugin system, we can do the same with GraphQL. So you can use, and we already use it for many, many months, even years. We use defer and stream. live queries, one-off directives, and all kinds of RFCs in GraphQL that are still in the RFC process and in different stages of that process. But it will take them many years to get into final spec. So you don't need to wait anymore. You can use all these extremely powerful features that many of them Facebook is using for years. You can already use it today in your server. So yeah, just to summarize, what we've done is basically, first of all, with Envelop, we created an extreme powerful system, and we've been using it for over a year now. So you probably know it already. But now we also took GraphQL Yoga and we created an easy way to just start doing it. And we believe that it's far better than any other option out there today. And we know, because it's under the guild, that this will continue to be true in the next years to come. So I think the best way for you to go and explore this thing is to go to graphqlyoga.com. There's a full tutorial day that you can go, and also under the repo, the GitHub repo, there's many examples. I wanted to walk them through today, but I don't have too much time. And also, Jamie couldn't give the talk, but he still has a lot of amazing videos on GraphQL Yoga. So you can check out his website, GraphQL WTF. And there's many videos and tutorials there, video tutorials there that you can check out and try yoga. So I think that's it for me, and I can take questions, and yeah, that's it.
Great, thank you, Uri. It was really amazing presentation, a lot of interesting stuff. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience. I don't see any yet, so maybe I'll just start, because I was actually wondering, because a few years ago when GraphQL became popular, the few first servers occurred, and I was wondering, what can you actually change in a GraphQL server? Just serving the schema, it just works,
Yeah.
there are those patterns like file upload stuff, I don't know, measuring the depth of queries, this kind of stuff, but basically you cannot change, core of the framework. So it's very interesting to hear that after those few years, you are coming with a little bit fresh approach with this plugin system. I think that this is really something completely fresh in this field. So I'm really excited, because mostly, I think in the JavaScript world, the Apollo server is now the most popular one. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I think I must say that I felt very similar to you, but that's why I was a bit frustrated that there are things that kept being hard, right? Like I was like you. I was like, okay, this is GraphQL. I understand the execution and everything. What can you invent anymore? But still, things were complicated, and that's, I think, what drove us to do that. Because we wanted to be okay, we can kind of solve, this is a solved problem now, let's move into the next problems. And it wasn't. So I think with this approach, maybe we got into a better place. I mean, we feel like we did, but and I think also, you mentioned the JavaScript ecosystem. I think this would be an interesting also approach to copy or to share with also the other languages. Basically, the GraphQL JS library is kind of like a reference implementation that a lot of other libraries from other ecosystems kind of copied with the same languages. We think that Envelop, for example, could be similar thing. And we would love to collaborate with people that are building GraphQL servers in other languages, to basically iterate over the idea and see if this idea could also benefit other languages. And you ask about the most popular framework in JavaScript, and it's Apollo Server today. And I think, I mentioned in my slides why I think there's many reasons why we now believe, we kind of feel. We didn't want to, if we could use Apollo Server and it will be enough for us, we would. But now, ever since we have Envelop and we have GraphQL Yoga, we kind of feel free. We feel like we could reuse a lot of code that we built again and again and again between our clients and all of our community. and we're now free to iterate. And you said also GraphQL is kind of like nothing to change, but then there's new features of GraphQL that we always wanted to use, like defer and stream, live queries, all kind of really cool stuff that unfortunately were blocked. So now we kind of like feel free and unblocked again. So yeah.
Sounds really great, and especially that I don't know if you know, but we are actually building a GraphQL server at our company. It's called Ariadne, and because we are like working in the Python ecosystem. At my company at Sailor Commerce, we use Graphene, and you said interesting thing about open source. Like a lot of projects are maintained for some time and then they are basically abandoned. And we feel the same with Graphene. So we are now stuck with like a little bit old version and thinking what we can do with this. Probably in the future we will migrate to some other solution, but this means rewrite of the entire platform, which is it will take us like a year of rewriting everything. So it's a big thing. But we are actually working on our own server. It's called Ariadne, and it's pretty popular in the Python ecosystem. But the fun fact is that it was actually inspired by Apollo server many years ago, like I don't know, 4 years ago when Apollo server was first released, like the first wave of GraphQL hype, like 2018, something like that. So I'm really curious how we could, what we could take from, for example, GraphQL Yoga, because this entire idea of plugins sounds really interesting. The most thing is that you can contribute. So do you have any contributors already for plugins from the community?
Yeah, many. I mean, it's extremely exciting, and it's exciting. And it's also easier to contribute now because you can contribute something very specific, and you don't need to know the framework necessarily. You just need to know the API of the plugins. And then you can also create, by the way, plugins that are just specific for your own company, right? Like we see a lot of companies creating like their own internal plugins that are just make sense across the companies for whatever reason. By the way, it's really exciting for me to hear, because I think we would love to collaborate with you. Like we can even schedule, some talks, in the later weeks, because we would love to collaborate. We would love to share those ideas. We don't want to be like, this is our advantage and we're gonna like lead the way or something. We love to share these ideas and also get like, I think, many of these ideas could actually bring like, first of all, like, or could bring good ideas hopefully to the Python ecosystem. And we would love to help and be part of it. 100%.
Sounds great. Actually, the main contributor of this Ariadne server is sitting like right behind me, because we have actual audience watching us live here. So we will talk about this later. We have one question from YouTube comments. Are there Yoga plugins that support deferred execution of streaming fields?
Yeah. So we have both. We support with GraphQL Yoga. You can use defer, stream, and live queries. You need because of GraphQL JS, you need some kind of like a different version of GraphQL JS in the Envelop docs, and I think maybe even in the Yoga docs, you can easily find it. There's like a whole guide of how to do it, how to use it. We use it already. And also we're now also pushing more on GraphQL JS. So hopefully, like, you wouldn't even need to do this like install special version, but you can just use main and just start doing it out of the box. So yeah, the answer is yes. And like Lauren from the guild leads that part, and also Yakov and Sahaj and and I want to say and also the live queries library is built by Lauren. So and it was very extremely valuable for us for all kinds of use cases. So that's one of the things that we're most excited about as well.
All right. I think we don't have any more questions. So last chance to ask Uri a question. I was wondering, So how big is the guild actually? Like how many people are working there, like contributing to the organization?
So we have a lot. Like it grew a lot in the last year also. I don't know. I myself don't know the exact number, but I think full time or at least 12, at least 12 for full time developers. And there's more and more from the community that are part time, or we're basically trying to support everyone that is doing open source around areas we care about, and we're continuously growing. Like our rule is we never hire someone that didn't do open source before join us, because the goal of the guilds is actually to support open source and support open source developers. And for many years we stayed small because even though we could hire more people, we didn't want to grow. We just waited for the right people that we could support and that could use our help. And then suddenly, like a year ago, more and more of these people, we started seeing more and more of these people, and it was very exciting. So now we're pretty big, and yeah, and we're continuously growing, and in a natural way though. So it's really fun. It's really fun and great. And we would love to get more people. Like if people are doing open source and they care about contributing and they care about GraphQL, or even not GraphQL, but just you're already doing open source and you feel like you need help there, you need some support, let us know.
But you are mostly focused on the JavaScript, right? Like you have those tools are related to JavaScript ecosystem right now.
Not necessarily. I mean, in the last couple of months, we also started basically building libraries in Rust. We have a couple projects in Rust. So this is also very exciting for us. And we're not limiting ourselves. Like people in the guild, me personally, I have like experience in C++ and C#. Others have experience in Java. So we're kind of like spread around. It's more like we were around the projects that we were like seeing demand. That's what we took. But basically, yeah, like basically, we're not limiting ourselves to any language specifically. And you guys are doing amazing work on Python, so there's no need for us to do anything.
We are basically open sourcing all of our libraries since like the beginning of the company. So
Yeah,
we feel the spirit. So
that's amazing.
sounds great. Okay, I think there are no more questions. So Uri, thank you for your talk and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. See you soon. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye bye. So I think that's it for the ninth edition of GraphQL Wrocław. Lastly, I will have maybe 2 quick announcements or things I want to say. Let me just, because as I said, we are doing this event as a hybrid event, let's say. So we are streaming on YouTube, but we are actually having people. So these are our friends in Piła, in the other office of Miromi, and these are our viewers here in Wrocław, sitting right behind me. So we are basically trying to resurrect this idea of events. So I'd like to invite you for our next event that will happen in July, which is like small anniversary for us because it will be the 10th GraphQL Wrocław. We will try to prepare something special and a lot of interesting content. So make sure to join us either online or come to our offices. I think that's it for the 9th edition of GraphQL Wrocław. See you in July. Bye-bye.